Okay, so we're here with Dan Cummings. Dan's a Constitution Party candidate for U.S. House of Representatives. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
I'm Brian Martin, managing editor here at the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. And Dan, our first question for you is, what specific issues or concerns caused you to run for Congress this year?
The party came to me and asked me to run. The laws of Wyoming, the election laws of Wyoming, require a 2% or more vote for a party to remain, keep ballot status. In other words, to be able to be on the ballots and have names actually printed for voters to see. I've been successful in doing that twice for the party, as they have requested in the past, and so the request has come again because of my past two successes.
Okay, and Dan, what qualifications do you bring to the table that would help you serve as a congressperson if you were elected?
I lived around the country, east and west, north and south, mountain states, plain states, Democratic and Republican states, and in Washington itself. I have a national view of the country, a national view of problems. Congress is the body that is to solve national problems. I have that viewpoint. I have that experience from living around the country. I've also lived in Wyoming for more than 10 years. I know what some of Wyoming's unique problems are, not to be solved by the federal government, because the federal government is not supposed to solve local problems, but to defend Wyoming against the federal government and against its interference, to help keep Wyoming independent and doing what it does best, or recovering what it once did best that has been lost by government action in many cases.
Okay. And Dan, what do you believe is the biggest challenge facing the nation? And once you identify that biggest challenge, please name one or two others.
Our biggest challenge is our absolutely enormous government that is consuming and wasting resources. The United States Treasury is the largest sum of money in the world and has the capability of doing the most evil, and in many cases seems to exercise and demonstrate that repeatedly. It's large enough to harm markets. It's large enough to harm our society and our cultures. And the number one need of America is to cut the size of the federal government, not cut its growth rate so that it grows more slowly, but actually to cut it smaller, to decrease its size, to decrease its influence, to decrease its authority.
Okay, and what are maybe one or two other biggest challenges the country faces?
Probably number two is preserving our national sovereignty from encroachment by international organizations and international influence. We have a heritage that sadly is unique in the history of the world. It would be wonderful if it were more widespread in history and in geography, but that is being eroded by international influence, and our culture within being eroded by alien cultures, non-family life, welfare mentality, and entitlement mentality. These are national suicidal issues.
Okay. One of the public's biggest complaints about our national political process is that everything's too partisan and nothing's getting done in Washington. If you were elected, how would you work with other people in Congress to make sure that things get done and that bills get passed. What do you think is the solution to the gridlock we're experiencing right now?
I see just the opposite. I see plenty being done, much too much being done. The federal government is spending $3.8 trillion, most of it very destructively, and I would like to see plenty of gridlock on that would cut it back to about $1 trillion. The parties seem very much to get together when it's time to spend. They get together to regulate. They get together to oppress us. They get together, or they cowardly run away when they should stand, such as against the Supreme Court's homosexual marriage case. That would be a nice time to get over the gridlock and take away the national court's authority over such issues, which Congress can do under the provisions of the Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2.
Okay, and Dan, we're going to go through a series of issues and just get your take on them. The first is military spending and the importance of F.E. Warren Air Force Base to us in Wyoming.
Warren Air Force Base, I believe, has some national importance. Its importance to Wyoming is irrelevant to Congress and the national government. The Defense Department is not supposed to be a welfare department for the states, should not be handing out military bases as plums or rewards for states or for their benefit. However, since I believe in national defense and I believe in a missile defense, I see Warren Air Force Base as of great importance to the United States, and that's the sole issue. Military bases that have only local importance should be closed. That includes Wyoming if necessary.
Okay. And where do you stand on the current level of defense spending?
That's hard to say because there's so much welfare in defense spending. So much of that attitude that Warren Air Force Base is important to Wyoming, therefore it should be supported. No. Warren Air Force Base should probably be supported because it's important to the national government. But there are many bases, particularly overseas, that should be closed. Europe is healthy and strong. Europe can defend itself. We should not be participating in a military welfare complex there. Same for South Korea. South Korea is a very strong, very powerful economy. We should allow them to defend themselves. We should not restrict them by treaty or other means from doing so. There are probably bases within the United States that should also be closed. On the other hand, we need a missile defense. In a hostile world where Korea and other nations are getting nuclear weapons and where Russia is becoming more threatening, there are places where we should be investing militarily. Okay. And those bases should be placed where it is most advantageous to the United States, not for local self-interest.
Okay, very good. The next issue, Dan, is climate change and environmental threats, and then some people have accused the Environmental Protection Agency of overreach into Wyoming, especially lately. What are your thoughts on those issues?
There's definite overreach into Wyoming. Scientific fact, as most aware to me, suggests that climate change is due to a 1,500-year sun cycle. These sun cycles are visible in old tree rings. They're visible in ice layers. They're visible in many ways, and we can look back through tens of thousands of years during which the sun has heated up for 750 years, roughly, then has cooled off for 750 years. Heated up, cooled off. We're in a heating up period. It's likely to continue. It is not mostly man-made, and I am totally against the fascist control freak police state that is developing to hammer out dissent against what is supposedly the scientific consensus. California has just is trying to pass a law to punish legally anyone who disagrees with the consensus thinkers. Dissenting scientists have their tires slashed and other intimidating forms of persecution at national conferences. Climate change is simply not a settled issue, and its proponents don't treat it as a settled issue. They don't act like we do toward people of the Flat Earth Society, which is scorn, ridicule, and ostracism. We don't worry about legal tactics. We don't worry about tire slashing. We don't worry about Wikipedia alterations and Wikipedia subversion to try to maintain a round Earth hypothesis, and we should not be doing those fascist control freak police state behaviors toward those who might think the evidence is not yet conclusive that global warming is man-made. It's mostly natural factors.
Okay, and the next issue, Dan, is the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and whether the federal government should provide health care coverage or insure health care coverage to all Americans.
The federal government cannot insure anything. The proper term is welfare. Medicaid, Medicare are not insurance programs, they're welfare programs. And the federal government should not be providing medical care to anyone at taxpayers' expense, except some aspects of the military. Military activity is a constitutional function. Soldiers get hurt, need care. It's proper to care for the soldiers, proper to provide physicians for soldiers. The military medical school would probably qualify as constitutionally approved for a military function. Beyond that, and perhaps providing medical insurance to its own employees, its own proper constitutional employees, as a fringe benefit, as has become the standard of the marketplace, is the only thing the federal government should have to do with medical care. Should not be providing it to the general populace. And it's not insurance, it's welfare, and should be called such, and should be debated as such.
Okay. Next issue is education reform and what the federal government's role should be in education, if any.
None. I favor the total dismantling of the Department of Education and will never vote for any appropriation for whatsoever for the Department of Education except for its liquidation, except for liquidation expenses.
Okay. And how important is it to reduce the federal deficit and the federal debt to get those problems under control?
I will propose a constitutional amendment to repeal Congress's authority to borrow money on the credit of the United States except during time of declared war, declared by Congress. I intend and wish to stop the debt cold. Now, not in the future. No promise to end the debt in the future will ever work. We will end the deficit and we'll begin paying the debt when we decide to do it now. It will never work in 10 years or in 5 years or next year. The temptation to spend and the political benefits of spending are too great.
Okay. The next issue we've been asking candidates about is endangered species and whether what should be done to protect and what's going on with the Endangered Species Act, especially as it relates to Wyoming.
I don't look at it as it especially relates to Wyoming. Again, Congress is a national office. Those in Congress are to look at the welfare of the country as a whole, not individual sections. The welfare of Wyoming belongs to the Wyoming legislature. Now, that would not prevent me from trying to protect Wyoming from federal abuse. In that case, I would stand up for Wyoming against federal abuse. The Endangered Species Act has no constitutional purpose. The Constitution section, or Article 1, Section 8, defines most of the authorities delegated to Congress and all of those that cost any significant revenue. And things that don't belong there or do not appear in that list Congress has no authority to meddle in. That includes natural science. That belongs to the states.
Okay, and the next question, Dan, has to do with air service in Wyoming. How essential is it to have air service in a small state, especially some of the small communities? And I assume that you're probably opposed to the federal government being involved in ensuring that continues?
Yes, that should be decided by the marketplace, not by politics, not by a fascist-controlled police state. If the customers are there, the airlines will come. If the customers are not there, there's no reason for them to come. Airlines should not be subsidized, coerced, intimidated, or ridiculed into coming. That should be decided entirely by the marketplace.
Okay, and we've been asking candidates about their feelings about the presidential candidates, the two nominees that are, or the three nominees, it's Gary Johnson and the Libertarian Party, and any others. Any feelings about the presidential candidates?
Hillary Clinton is nothing more than an unindicted criminal. She's an accessory to rape, multiple rapes. She facilitates a sexually predatory husband, and I don't mean Monica Lewinsky. Donald Trump is totally lacking as a gentleman and is predictable, and who knows what. Gary Johnson is a lousy libertarian, hardly qualifies as a libertarian at all. He thinks libertarianism means freedom for marijuana, and he can't seem to see beyond that.
Okay, Dan, and the last question I had for you is, what do you believe are the priorities for Wyoming's lone member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and what would your role be among 435 people up there?
To be a voice for cutting the size of the government drastically. Standing alone, if necessary, against its expansion. More than anything else, getting the federal judiciary under control. That seems to be an area that nobody is paying any attention to except Ted Cruz, who all alone has introduced a bill to withdraw congressional approval for federal judiciary appellate jurisdiction in family matters. That would take care of the homosexual marriage decision of last summer, would return marriage to the states. So far, last time I checked, he had no co-sponsors. If I'm elected, that bill will be introduced in the House, hopefully as a leading light to solving many of our social problems that are coming from the courts. The Supreme Court must be cut back to its proper function.
Okay, Dan, is there anything else you'd like to address that were not in any of the questions that I asked you?
Yes, I'll talk a little bit about congressional indulgence. That comes up in public questionnaires frequently. People have asked me, what do I think of congressional salaries? I'm not too worried about congressional salaries as they are. They're not high for the kind of work that congressmen do. A congressman who does what he should do is worth $1 million. Most of them are worth next to nothing. Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, Maxine Waters, Loretta Sanchez, Charles Rangel are worth nothing at all. But the biggest problem with congressional compensation is their fringe benefits, and particularly their retirement. I am in favor of abolishing congressional retirement pensions. The Constitution provides for compensation for congressional work. That compensation should end on the last day of elected service. And I favor repealing past established congressional pensions without grandfathering anyone, including dependents. The congressional salary is enough. It's not extravagant. It's not poverty. It's similar to what other people out in the marketplace doing important work are compensated. It's considerably less than many comparable occupations. But the fringes and the retirement should go. And I pledge that I will not accept a congressional pension under any circumstances whatsoever, even at the cost of my life. That means I won't be very sympathetic to anybody else's pensions either.
Okay, Dan, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Anything else for us, Dan?
Well, I'm pondering.
Oh, okay, sorry. Interrupt.
The main functions of the federal government, and of Congress in particular, are listed in Article 1, Section 8. Anything not clearly stated there doesn't belong in the federal government. My goal will be to eliminate it and to cut it back to those defined functions, mostly military and foreign affairs, the things that make us a nation. Congress is not the place to solve local problems. Local problems are to be solved in state legislatures or in cooperation between states. An ideal size for the federal government is considerably under $2 billion, possibly even under $2 trillion, possibly under $1 trillion. That means a lot of closed bureaus. It means a lot of dismissed so-called public servants. It means downsizing drastically. We're headed for bankruptcy and dissolution as a nation. We're headed for financial chaos if we continue on our present course. The Democratic platform is nothing more or less than a national suicide pact. The Republican platform doesn't differ enough from that to be truly distinctive. I believe that the platform of the Constitution Party is significantly different.
All right, Dan, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with me.
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Yeah. I will use the interview on my